Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Well, howdy there, friend. Welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Yeah, welcome. Hi. Welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're super thrilled to have you back for another week. And this week we're going to be moseying out into the great yonder, past the plains and into the old west. But we're gonna go to the old west indie style, and not Indiana Jones not Indiana Jones style. We're gonna go indie, just regular old, like independent westerns. But first, before we get to that, how you doing, Ryan? How are things?
Pretty good.
Yeah, you so is that kind of what you've been watching this week, is some of these independent westerns?
Haven't watched these for years. I did watch. I won't tell you which one. See if you can tell from the content of the podcast.
Yeah.
I did watch one of them a couple of weeks ago, and I had the thought then. We did our postmodern Western episode, which we're very proud of. One of our least popular episodes ever. What
Still a
could
good
we
episode,
do that would be even less popular to the listening populace was my thought. Let's do less mainstream and less blockbuster Westerns that nobody has seen.
Right.
And there's a bit of redundancy here because these are all fairly recent, I guess. I don't know what's recent for me and recent for you. The idea was to do the indie westerns of the streaming era from 2006, 2007 to present. We're going to do them in reverse order just to make it as confusing as possible. And there's a whole bunch of these, and I typically see all of them. I get that Westerns aren't everybody's thing. They really are a thing that some people, it's a whole genre some people completely avoid,
right,
regardless of their content, regardless of whether they have a star they like, regardless of whether, there may be an interesting story there. So this isn't trying to convert any of you to loving Westerns, but we can at least talk a little bit about why we like them, why I like the ones on this list in particular, and maybe give you a chance to see something different, because there's something magical about Westerns to me, to people who love them. And I don't love, we talked to Chris Fitchett, a couple of weeks ago on the Ozploitation episode, and he said, all these directors of my generation, they all grew up watching American Westerns, and that American Western feel, or spaghetti Westerns or whatever, they all grew up watching the sort of classic 50s and 60s Westerns. And these aren't that. They really don't have that Jimmy Stewart, John Wayne sort of Western feel to them at all. They're not all this way, but largely these are darker, more serious stories of isolation, of the real emotional and societal impact of lawlessness, and corruption and stuff. And it to me, even though there's an Aussie Western here, there's a New Zealand Western, there are other ones. There are potato famine, Irish Westerns that really would call those Westerns at this point.
Yeah.
So they're not uniquely American stories, but there's, to me, there's something about them that is, that era is, we still, as a country, as a society, are still very much paying for the sins of that era, and that to me is interesting. What they say in Unforgiven, deserves got nothing to do with it. That's a great line in and out of context, but deserve, and I don't want to say karma because I don't really believe in that, but that idea that the things that you do, even if you're part of a culture, even things you didn't do, that those things, those actions, that follows through and becomes a part of what you are. And I think that that's an era that a lot of the things that happened are a part of what we are as a country even today. So I think there's relevance there. And I think you look back, and it's also, what do I say in the very first episode? I like to be transported. Western's a whole different reality, man. It's a whole different thing. It's like the Roman Empire or outer space or whatever. It's a whole, it takes you, literally, they take you away to another world, and Hollywood still likes them, even though Hollywood does not love them at all. It still likes them because you can make these films, these little Hollywood ghost towns and things. These places still exist. The guns are still in storage. The costumes are, it's all there ready for you to tell one. And all you got to do it is, raise some money, but have your own unique spin on the genre. And these filmmakers have tried to do that. So,
I think, classic Westerns, tended, and spaghetti Westerns, as gunfighting, violent, and sometimes as they were, but it's still romanticized. It romanticized an era where, good was good, bad was bad, and whoever.
Yeah, the spaghetti Western sort of changed that, where everybody was bad. That was the step they took away from the classic Western. But I agree with you.
But there was still a romance element to it. It was big, sweeping. It was all, and I think a lot.
They're adventure tales, really.
Exactly. The modern
mission
Western,
movies, and
the modern Western really just sort of turns it on its head. It sort of subverts the romanticism a bit. I think that it also really embraces the gray areas. It's no longer, hero in a white hat and the villain in the black hat. It's,
and yet they also embrace the good old, like, there's things you got to have, the good old shootout, the revenge tale. What is it? The setups are very similar. So they owe a lot to the classic Westerns, but I agree with you. They tend to be more substantive, and that's what draws me into them. Some of them, we'll talk about them, are downright unpleasant.
Sure.
It's not really a countdown, so you won't hear the countdown thing. It's just sort of a list, like I said, starting with the most recent ones, because I think we've talked about them a little, some of these, in our end of the year episodes and stuff. These have come up before, a few of them. Some of them never have, and this is a chance for us to sort of clear the decks without ranking them. That's a little tricky, because
I'm calling it? You know what I'm calling it? I'm calling it the Indie Western Roundup. So let's jump in. Let's get to it. First one up.
Roundup.
The Roundup is The Kid.
We talked about this 2016 year in review.
No, this was 2019.
19 year in review?
Yeah. 2019.
That makes sense, because we weren't doing this in 2016.
That's true. It sometimes feels like we've been doing it for that long, but no.
It feels like this show has started back in 2016. This very episode. I started singing along with the producers back in 2016. Back in those days, you didn't have everybody looking for gold. It was just me and Ellie. I'm glad you think that's funny. That's my old prospector voice.
I like old prospector voice.
He's funnier, I think, when he's commenting on the modern problems of today's society because of the incongruity.
So it'd be more like, I can't get my external hard drive to talk to my computer. Oh, I'm going to tar and feather that.
When will my health care provider call me about my inoculation? Yee-Haw!
Yee-Haw!
Anyway, the kid, it's funny. There's a few movies here that they all are based around
Billy the Kid?
No, this movie is based around Billy the Kid, but it's more than that. They're based around this crew of people that were all doing the same movies at the same time. Most notably, they all came together to make Fuqua's remake of The Magnificent Seven with Denzel Washington and Ethan Hawke and Chris Pratt.
Mm-hmm.
This film and Vincent D'Onofrio. This film was directed by Vincent D'Onofrio, and his whole family is in it. Like all his kids and his sister and his wife, and like everybody's did something on it. So it's got that Vincent finally got to make his own movie kind of feel to it. Mm-hmm. But it has several people from Magnificent Seven. It was made right after Magnificent Seven, which is weird. Because one big Hollywood Western, and Magnificent Seven won't be on this list. That's the closest thing we've had to a big blockbuster, modern blockbuster Western in recent memory. And that film's, I actually think it's pretty fantastic for what it is. So we've kind of already given that the old seal of approval, if you want to.
Mm-hmm. That'll go right there.
Just checking. The seal of approval is new to me, everybody.
The seal of approval will only appear. I don't have a sounder for the seal of approval.
I get it. It'll appear later.
In real time. It'll appear later.
Why everyone's watching this going, we just saw it. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah, what are you doing?
It's a little behind the scenes for you. Anyway, Magnificent Seven came out. It cost a ton of money. It had a bunch of stars in it, and it didn't do very well financially. So it just shows that people don't dig Westerns. I mean, some people do. It didn't embarrassingly tank at the box office either, but they can't make a more crowd-pleasing, star-laden Western than that. I don't know how you do it. And maybe you shouldn't do it. Westerns maybe shouldn't be big, giant blockbusters anymore. Maybe they should be these smaller movies. Vincent's film, The Kid, makes a case that it can be really great when it is. It's the story of Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, which is that old classic Western legend about the time that the bounty hunter captured Billy and had him in custody for a while. And the title has a double meaning. It's about a kid who it's experience. The whole movie's experience through the eyes of this child. Chris Pratt plays a bad guy in it. He plays a really mean son of a bitch in it, and he was. That's why he agreed to do it. He said, Vincent's probably the only guy in Hollywood who will cast me as this psycho. Yeah. Because at this point, I have to play the wisecracking hero. And while I'm ideally suited to that sort of work, I heard his interview with it where he's like, Hollywood producers, don't stop sending me your wisecracking hero scripts or whatever.
Right.
But he said,
I like my paychecks. I like the paychecks that I'm getting, but please.
Exactly. Living the dream, he calls it, which it must be for him.
Yeah.
But he's great in it in that way. He's a bit of a wisecracky psycho, but whatever. But the real joy of that film is good old Ethan Hawke and as this kind of stoic man of little words, Western hero that we're so used to. He's great as Pat Garrett, and Dane DeHaan was born to play Billy the Kid. He is fantastic in the film. We've seen Brad Pitt play Jesse James, and we've seen big stars play these legends. And the appeal of that is that I think Brad Pitt has some sense, and I think Johnny Depp, same playing Dillinger. Like, I think they have this sense of what it's like to be a celebrity of that era in a way that we kind of can't relate to. And it's the legend, the story that's built up around you, the hype that's built up around you, even though you're just this person. There's a connection there. Yeah. And Dane, I don't know, he's not like some huge star. He's been in plenty of hit movies, but he's an interesting actor when he's allowed to do interesting things. When you try and box him into a conventional role, he feels like a sort of trapped animal. There's a sort of hard to watch him in a classically heroic role in a way that a guy like Pratt just slips into that easily. But he's fantastic as Billy the Kid because he's out of his mind, and you have no idea what he's going to do from moment to moment. He's burdened by kind of awful things he's done. He's really complex, but there's a psychological aspect to him. He's kind of messed up and beyond help, and reckless and ruthless in a way that people shouldn't become really in life. And so he's the wild card element of the story, like he should be, and it's sort of perfect match of actor and character. And then, you have this other pretty, anytime an actor co-writes and directs a film, you typically get really, really good acting. You get, it's just that's the part that guy can make sure works in every take. You know what I mean? Even if he misses out on some other things, getting the performances down so that everybody in the room is happy with what they've done before moving on to the next thing. That's a perfect thing for an actor director to accomplish, and D'Onofrio does a good job with that.
Yeah.
But I thought The Kid was fantastic, and I still do. It's a really, really good one. It's kind of the most recent one on this list. It's not the deepest or most thematically rich, but a lot of it rings really, really true. And for a subtle Western, I super dug it. And the kid and his mom, like seeing this crazy story play out from these conventional point of view is also very powerful. It was a smart way to make that, in my opinion.
Very cool. All right. Next up is The Sisters Brothers.
Yeah, we talked about this in the same episode, actually, the same year in review. So we won't talk about this too much, but again, a couple of big stars. This is John C. Reilly read this novel and he bought the rights to it. And it's not the same as D'Onofrio. He didn't direct it, and it's not a John C. Reilly production written by John C. Reilly. Like, it's not that kind of thing. But he just wanted to be in it because he thought it was a cool story. And it's him and Joaquin Phoenix play these brothers whose last name is Sisters. That's the
play on the title. That's
exactly
the titular haha.
And they're outlaws, gunfighters for hire, what have you. And the other big star that's in it is Jake Gyllenhaal, who's great in it, who's a bounty hunter who's hunting down this dude that the Sisters brothers get hooked up with, played by Riz Ahmed, who's this kind of educated, sciencey guy who has found a new way to pan for gold. And it's the way we look for gold today, actually. Chemically, we look for it.
Yeah.
And he's figured it out. I'm not sure before really anyone, I think, in history did. I think that's a bit of a MacGuffin. But doing it, it's dangerous. There's really dangerous chemicals and stuff that he's using. But it works. So they get all wound up together, and then the two teams of bounty hunters, it's like a series of misadventures. There's a ton of humor in it. Joaquin and Riley are very believable brothers, even though they're playing entirely different kind of guys. That chemistry and that history comes to life in screen. And if you stick around long enough in that one, you get to see Carol Kane as their mother.
Yep.
Which is fantastic. The movie is bittersweet in a lot of ways, but one of the things that's great about it is that it does, for all the awful things that happen, it does sort of end in this wonderful place. And you can't say that about many of these. So I really like Sisters Brothers. It's on this list because not a lot of people have heard of it. Hardly anyone's seen it, but that was about a $50 million, with some real acting talent. That was a big
$38 million budget. Yeah. And it brought in 13, a modest 13.
So it's a very little scene, but actually a very lavish film that's worth your time. Just if you like any of those people, Gyllenhaal's great and everything pretty much. I can't think of the last time I saw him in something where I was like, oh, you stink, Gyllenhaal.
Yeah.
Pretty much these days, whenever I see him, I'm like, I've gone from, oh, he's a good one to I'm excited to see it just because he's just doing it. Like he has graduated to that level for me. And, you know, Joaquin's hit or miss, but kind of like Dane DeHaan, Joaquin, he's a unique guy and you just never know what you're going to get. But with a guy like him, sometimes you get rather off the hook incredibleness. And Riley, who's used to being the clown, has to be a little bit of the straight man in this. And it's great to see him being a person and not just a whatever.
Sure.
Not just this sidekick or, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or, you know, I mean, he does broad comedy and sketch comedy as good as anybody. So I love John C. Reilly, but it's fun. He's a proper actor and it's fun watching him play an actual person.
It's even fun watching him in Kong Skull Island.
Right, but that's the role I'm talking about. He's a crazy man crazy for these reasons, and everything that comes out of his mouth is weird and funny. I mean, that's fun, but that guy's not a person.
Yeah. I mean,
nobody in Kong Skull Island is a person.
Well, I just mean that what I mean is that he's not playing broad. I mean, in Kong Skull Island, I don't want this to go down a Kong Skull Island.
He's great in Kong Skull Island. But maybe he may even be the best thing about it. I'm saying we've seen he does that all the time. Hollywood wants him in that Kong Skull Island role, the crazy guy, the weird guy, the dumb guy, whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
It's awesome to see him not be that stuff.
Sure.
For a change, to be a guy who, while he says something funny every once in a while, it does so like as a character that's a person. It's hard to explain, but
kind of like he's like him in Magnolia when he's the cop in Magnolia. He's a real guy there. He's a real guy in that. Yeah. I'm not, you know, and he's quirky enough just as a human being that no matter what he says, sometimes it's going to kind of make you laugh or make you chuckle just because he's an odd duck of a human.
Right. And I like watching him play I like watching him play these crazy, weird, funny people. You know, I like him in Talladega Nights and everything. I mean, I love him. I'm just saying
Walk Hard is even he's a crap movie like Walk Hard. He makes it so much fun.
Right.
Because he just anchors that thing. All right.
I'm just warning you. This is
Joaquin
not that. Plays that, and Joaquin plays it in an off the hook, unpredictable way. And you're in a way that is not satisfying or would not have been satisfying in something like Kong Skull Island. And Riley, on the other hand, he just has to show up because it can't be Riz Ahmed as a mad scientist and Joaquin as this crazy psycho. What's he going to do? Somebody in the room has to tell the story and be the thing that gives you a reason to believe in any of it. And Riley picked the script, bought the rights to the book and picked a role for himself. And it's a great role. Actors don't get enough credit for doing that, we've talked about a bunch of different movies now, but very famously when Christian Bale won his Oscar for the Fighter, he said something that I think is true and that we should always remember. He thanked at the end of his list of all the people he thanked when he won that Oscar was Mark Wahlberg. And he said, I couldn't have done this in a movie if you weren't there in all these scenes, being the story, holding down the reality of the thing. You can't, if you don't have that partner to balance things out, to make it grounded in reality, then you're just a bunch of crazy nonsense. You let me stretch this out as far as I could, and without you, I couldn't have done it. And that's the kind of thing this is. Maybe not quite on that grand a scale, but
yeah.
I loved that speech for that reason. And then I loved watching Bale pay that back in American Hustle with the same basic group of people. That was where he still got to be a little loony, but where he really had to be the human core of the story, because if he wasn't, he wasn't going to get a lot of help from this other rogues gallery of people.
Yeah.
So I like Sisters Brothers a lot. It's a very actorly movie where the performances are very super, where they're just given the priority of the thing. And as a result, the plot is kind of a little random and there's some other things about it, but I liked it a lot. I like Ahmed in it a lot. I like Gyllenhaal a lot. I haven't even mentioned a woman yet.
Right.
There are westerns. Sorry,
it
about
is
that.
westerns. Yeah.
There's some coming, so hang in there.
All right. Next up is a guy I was for no reason at all. I was thinking about what has he been up to? Where am I going to see him again? Bill Pullman, starring in The Ballad of Lefty Brown.
Well, he's got his TV show, which is a pretty big hit.
Yeah, it's true.
Where he plays the tortured detective. That's a role everybody secretly wants to play at one point in their life. He plays as tortured detective as has ever been tortured. I can't remember the name of the show.
The Sinner.
The Sinner, right. It's a good show. Not a great show necessarily, but quite good. And Bill's a big reason for that. It's a great part for him because he gets to do very little and he gets to just show you slivers of things. And whether you know it or not, those, on a TV show in particular, the people who are big, broad, and badass, you get exhausted with in a hurry. There is a slow burn nature to doing good television where you kind of let the character happen a little naturally, and that keeps us interested in them. The mystery of them keeps us interested. Lefty Brown, I have to say, though, is a whole different thing altogether. Lefty Brown is your typical dumb. I don't want to call him dumb because I don't even want to call him useless, but he's a problematic hanger-on guy in all these other cowboys' life. Peter Fonda and other people. He's not the reliable one. He's the one that nobody trusts, nobody thinks is making a smart decision, nobody believes what he says about anything because he's always lying about everything. And all of that history sort of catches up with him in a moment where what he's trying to do is the right thing. And it's an interesting story in that way because this guy is truly on an island and even the people he's helping are against him. It's a cool story like that. It's a simple Western revenge story. You killed my friend. My friend was the only person I cared about. So I'm going to find out who did it. And I'm just going to shoot him and kill him because it's the old West after all. And his friend's widow, and just nobody believes him. Everyone thinks for a while, everyone thinks it's him that did it. It's cool. And it's hard to explain. He's like one of those cartoon sidekicks, who just make jokes the whole time. But every once in a while they say something and it's like, geez, that's almost profound. That's a cliche, but in Pullman's hands, it really works well. And I found The Ballad of Lefty Brown to be really entertaining and great for Bill Pullman fans who were thinking like Joel was. Cause, if you're thinking about watching like the Independence Day sequel or something, I recommend Ballad of Lefty Brown instead. It's way, way better, way better, and way better Pullman-esque projects.
Yeah, he's going to be in another film. I just saw it in the trailer.
He's always been a really good actor. Yeah. He's always, he's always been this, somewhat generic guy on the outside, but there's always something going on in him that's a little different. And the older he gets, the more he's going to get to flex those muscles. And that's fun to see because he ain't a leading man anymore. And he's not even the guy that the girl breaks up with for the leading man anymore. He's going to have to, which he did a ton.
Right.
He's going to get old and he's got to find ways to keep it interesting. And he's becoming the old grizzled character actor of our dreams right before our eyes. And that's exciting because he's a good one. We like Bill.
All right, let's move on. I'm just going to do this because I have to pull something up here. All right, that bought me enough time. All right, so next up.
No whip that time.
All right. There we go.
I'm not doing it again. That whip left me hanging.
I'll give you the whip will be in the
it can't be, or now this version of me will sound stupid. You're sticking with that whip on that.
Okay, hey, that's one less edit for me to do. I'll yeah.
You got your whip in afterwards, so we kind of had it both ways.
All right, next up is The Stolen.
What did I say? New Zealand Western, right?
This is the New Zealand one. Yep, this was the one.
Alice Eve plays a woman whose kid is kidnapped and given to some settler couple upriver, and she's got to go on this odyssey to get her daughter back. You know, it's basically a Lifetime movie of the week, except it's set in the wilds of New Zealand in this sort of Western frontier setting. Is it Graham McTavish that's in this one too?
Correct.
Graham McTavish, and a great Scottish actor, and Jack Davenport, from who you all know from the Pirates of the Caribbean films. Jack's a great actor, and his role in this film is really interesting. Graham is what he always is, but he's Johnny on the spot with the sort of old grizzled guy story. And Alice plays this, at least for the New Zealand, you know, she's this total fish out of water, but it's force of will and whatever that connection is between movie baby and movie mom that just can't be stopped. And she goes on this incredible odyssey to the end of the world, truly,
right,
to find her kid, and then to get it back and to get it out of there to safety. Like, just it's really cool. It's a kind of dark Western, I have to say. It's not a happy story, but you can't not root for her. And Alice Eve's she's a really cool actor that's sort of trapped in this generically blonde, hot body. And Hollywood's tried to have their way with her, and to some one degree or another kind of has. But you can see her always she does these things that really push the envelope. You know, she's done some really tricky roles in some very complicated movies. They're not the type that get watched, but I always appreciate that when somebody who can maneuver through, you know, there was this era that she was in where, you know, they did a Valentine's Day movie and a New Year's movie, and it's all this big budget Hollywood crap, and all these stars show up for it. She's done her fair share of stuff like that, but she shows up in films like this, and she's carries this movie and is outstanding in it. So hats off to her.
Well, terrific. Okay.
And it was a tough shoot. You can feel it. You can feel the sweat, the mud, the wetness, the rain. Like, you really can feel it all. And it's a jungle Western to some degree, but it really still is a Western despite all that. It's the classic Western. Except instead of hiring a gunfighter to go find her kid for her, she goes and does it herself, which is awesome.
Okay, next up is Hostiles.
This is probably the best movie we're going to talk about, and it's a little tough to talk about, actually, because it's so good and so kind of nuanced. It obviously has lots of Western trappings. A post-Civil War captain, played by Christian Bale, is hired to bring an old is it Lakota? I can't remember. Cheyenne warrior, basically, to the reservation where he's to be retired there. I don't mean that. I mean that literally. They're caught this guy. They kind of are still in a place where they don't want to start a battle by killing him, but they want him out of the way. And so it needs to be escorted to the land that's been designated for him to disappear onto. And Bale's character, who's been fighting the Cheyenne and sort of living the tough frontier life of a soldier, obviously has a lot of mixed feelings about that. And Christian Bale, Wes Studi, and there's a woman in it too, played by Rosamund Pike. I can tell you right now, folks, that's tough to beat. And even though the movie feels like a play set outside at times, it's a talky movie for you know what I mean? For this kind of thing. It's full of atmosphere and stuff, but it really isn't a conventional Western. It's a rather unconventional one. There's a few shootouts and things, and they run into all kinds of trouble on their trip. You know, in that way, it's very much a conventional Western, but it's hard to make an allegory about America and still have the characters and things not just represent ideals or represent, you know what I mean? They have to be characters that you believe for it to be a story worth telling, and Hostiles just nails both parts of that. Plus, it's just stunningly beautiful and atmospheric film. Truly, it's one of those that you could really follow it with the volume off. You know,
Sure.
you miss out on the music then too, which I don't recommend. But you really, it's all in the eyes, and it's the meaning is there in every scene. You know, and I really really dig that. So that Hostiles is a really strong film.
Very cool. Very cool.
And again, plenty of star power, honestly.
Yeah.
But just it's a Western. So people just didn't see it. And thank God these filmmakers grew up on these things and loved them the way I do, or nobody would make them, because all these films are these. That's one of the things that's great about it. So one of the things that's great about the modern indie Western is that they really are labors of love of somebody involved.
Yeah.
They don't get made because they're going to make money. They can be made cheaply and independently. They're action movies that can be made on the cheap. So that gives them some appeal to the smaller movie studios like Lionsgate and stuff. But somebody to make a Western today, somebody's got to really, really care about the core story. And this movie, you could feel that the love and the meaning behind it all comes through more so than any of the rest of them. It's a great film. One of my favorite films of a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and it doesn't surprise me. So, you know, some that we are getting, you know, A-list talent and all these, and some of these are A-list or are actor driven productions, in the sense that, you know, actors are also producing these things, because actors also traditionally love being in Westerns. They love, you know, everyone, you know, men, women, they love having, you know, the big bulky gun, the gun on the holster, the clothes, the chaps, the horse riding, it's a fun era to get to try to sort of immerse.
We remember in our J.O. Sanders interview, we talked to him. We barely talked about the couple of Westerns that he did, but you just saw him light up when we started talking about him. Yep. You could just see that excitement about, oh yeah, you know, I could have done Westerns forever. You know what I mean? It was like, that's neat. That's a very real thing Joel's talking about. And if you want the evidence, you click back and watch that episode again. You'll see him when we talk about the Young Riders and a couple of the other things that he worked on of that nature. And he loved doing that stuff. And I get it. It's neat.
Okay. Next one is Woman Walks Ahead.
We talked about this too in an end of year episode. I loved Woman Walks Ahead. This film was written by Stephen Knight, who's one of my favorite screenwriters of all time. And it skews the history a little bit. It's the story of the woman who came out west to paint Sitting Bull's portrait. Yes. Right as his ghost dancing protests started. I think maybe people do remember Sitting Bull was a political figure. Truly, like, he was a very savvy guy. You know, he did the Bill Cody Wild West show, and he made a lot of money for that. There's this great scene where he makes a bunch of money from this woman who comes out west, you know, looking to kind of exploit him to a little bit of a degree, but also to capture something that she thought was going to be lost as an artist. And he kind of cons her out of a bunch of money, and then he basically gives it all back to her and asks her to use it for these people in this village that he's living in. So he was, and his folks before him were wealthy Native Americans. We don't tend to think of them that way, but they were a well-to-do family throughout history, and he knew the value of money to his own culture, but to white people in particular. He knew how to exploit them for it. And then he kind of knew how to make it work for his cause too. And all that is in the film. It's great. But who plays Sitting Bull in it? Can you tell me?
Yes, I can.
Before I move on, we really should mention him, because he's extraordinary in it.
Yeah. Michael Gray Eyes.
Man, is he good. Really, really good portrayal of a very complicated guy. The woman is Jessica Chastain. She plays the artist. And there's several other really good actors too that are involved in it. It's a really good movie, but it's not. This truly is not a shoot 'em up Western. It really is a drama that takes place right as the Old West is dying, as seen from this East Coast liberals' point of view. And it's also about this very unique relationship that these two people had. Even though the details really are jumbled around to make a nice dramatic arc. You know, it really is inspired by true events rather than trying to tell the story of the last days of Sitting Bull. But it gets a lot of the little details it gets right, and those things are where the thing kind of lives and breathes. And A Woman Walks Ahead, that's the name that Sitting Bull gives to Chastain's character.
Caroline Weldon is the name.
Was a non de plume. She was a divorced high society woman. She wasn't even divorced yet. In the film, she's a widow and she's haunted and all these sort of conventional movie things. No offense to Stephen Knight, who I said was a great writer. He sort of knew you got to get to the point. You got to get the thing going or it can't even be a thing.
Right.
So he eschewed the complicated nature of her, but she changed her name because she slept around on a husband that everybody knew, and she couldn't go by his name, and she couldn't marry the next guy until she got a divorce, which was not easy to get if a woman wanted one in those days. So blah, blah, blah. The woman of the story in real life was a very complicated woman. The woman in the movie is equally complicated, but just in some different ways. Woman Walks Ahead is a great film.
Yeah, I see it.
And a great sort of feminist Western in a way.
Yeah, it's a Zwick Herskovitz,
production.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and Stephen Knight, who is and a woman directed it too, whose name I can't remember.
Susanna White.
And that makes a difference. There's this. I don't want to ruin it. There are a couple of things in the film that happen that are so poetic and wonderful and so cinematic and tragic, and I just kind of ruin the whole thing if I say what they are. But there are these ideas that clearly inspired Knight's script that make the thing worth telling. And I really believe for a person who wants to watch a nuanced human story, there's a lot to reward you here. So the Westing trappings should not dissuade you from seeing it if you love a really, really good biographical drama. Because that's really more what it is.
Well, excellent. Okay, next up is In a Valley of Violence.
A revenge story by people just too stupid to pull it off.
Yes, I see it as a Blumhouse production.
It is. I don't know. Oh, I guess they were working on one of those Killing Day movies. What are those called? Where the day comes where you get to kill everybody or whatever.
Purge.
Some Purge movie, maybe the first Purge movie. They were working on it, and they were in this house, and they were all blacked out, and and in their free time during setups and stuff, T. West and Ethan Hawke would sit in a corner and watch westerns. And they're like, yeah, we should make a Western, and they convinced Blum to fund it, and he's got money coming out of his ears from all his low budget horror success. And they made a really fun, low budget Western. Again, this film is a Western with Ethan Hawke that came out right before Magnificent Seven. So he literally made 3 Westerns in a row, which is just crazy to think of. But in this one, he plays the Drifter. It's basically it's a loose remake of High Plains Drifter, except the bad guys are incredibly stupid. And the one guy who does have some smarts, played by John Travolta, as Marshall, who kind of runs the town. His kid is one of the stupid gang people who do something stupid that caused the valley to erupt with violence, and it can't really be stopped. And it's his character. Hawke is great in it, and the kid is great in it, and the gang of idiots are all played by these grizzled. Larry Fastenson plays one of them, and it's there are these great characters to play, these Western idiots. It's hard to explain, but they're a staple of all these films. This time you got basically all of the kinds in a movie together, making the thing happen. And it's tragic what happens. The film's not a comedy or anything. It's awful. but it says something about the world too, and it says something about just the world of violence. T's, if I'm saying his name right, I'm never sure, but I call him T West.
Yeah, I think.
You know, his films always have some weird underlying sad meaning to them. Even his dumbest horror movies, there's some sad human truth at the core of them. That's why they're worth watching, because I don't necessarily love any of them, but I enjoy them all to one degree or another because he's a thoughtful filmmaker. This film is like that. It's just in a Western setting. And Travolta's fantastic. He gives a really, really strong, subtle performance because he really is the only one. He gets what's happening and trying to make peace and can't. And the helplessness of that for a guy to be smart enough, but to sadly be related to the person who's to blame for everything, and knows there's a reckoning coming and knows he's on the wrong side of it, but still is stuck there. That's really, really cool. And Ethan will talk with you until it's time for the shooting to start, but he's on a mission in that film that can't be stopped. And it's fun to watch him in that kind of role too, because usually he's the quiet, thoughtful type. So in the Valley of Violence, it's 90 breezy minutes. It's a very entertaining Western. Lots of shootouts, lots of really dumb people saying super dumb and funny things. Despite the underlying tragedy of the story, like that really, it does have great entertainment value. There's another movie coming up here too that does that really, really well. We'll talk about that.
Very cool. All right. Next up is The Duel.
U.S. Marshal is sent out to the southern Mississippi or something to investigate some murders.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little different, just slightly different setting, kind of a different story. Something that's not different is a lot of these modern Westerns have a recurring character, especially in the later period ones, is the evil preacher character. And Woody Harrelson plays an evil preacher, where, what did they say? They said, it's a quote from a different movie, and I'm not even going to source the quote, but it was, he's the kind of preacher who church don't end till the snakes are back in the bag. I wish I could remember what that's from. That's funny, because we all know what kind of preacher that is. Harrelson, though, plays the guy like he knows he's evil and deserves to die. And when the lawman comes to town, played by a very great old-fashioned generic heroic role played by Liam Hemsworth, the greatest heroic generic guy out there.
Yeah.
And he and I mean that as a compliment. Like he's just the guy who he just lives and breathes this sort of, that's why the reversal that happens with him in Hunger Games is so powerful, because you don't see it coming from that guy. Even though you see it literally before it happens, you still kind of don't believe it until you experience it. And in this film, the power comes from this guy's, rides into town. Alice Braga is in it too, Brazilian actress who's fantastic and everything. And it's going to solve the town's problems. But he runs into a villain who isn't an ugly, mean-spirited gunslinger. He's this crazy preacher who has everybody wrapped around his fingers and who has all this guilt about being an evil preacher and is happy to see the guy come to kill him, and yet won't go down without a fight. So it's this very interesting, weird dynamic where the villain and Harrelson plays this in a great way. And of course, the two of them are in the Hunger Games movie. So there's this natural chemistry between them that it doesn't really matter because they're strangers in the film, but it matters. It makes a difference in the film, because this is a really low budget one, I have to say. And in the Valley of Violence, I guess similarly, they're all widescreen entertainments that are shot by people who know how to make movies, but it's just, you look at the cast list, like 12 people or something,
right,
that actually have speaking roles. It's that kind of film, but it's a good one. It's a good one. If you're a fan of Harrelson and you want to see him doing something kind of different, although it's kind of the same as other weird people roles, but he can do that sort of thing. Like the weird guy he plays in the final Planet of the Apes movie, that military guy.
Yeah.
That Colonel Kurtz type dude that he played. Woody's great at that stuff. And he advocates for this guy who's clearly evil in a weird way that makes the film unique. That's what I liked about it. Because Liam, like I said, with respect, there's nothing unique about him. The young, upstanding, morally centered guy who goes to town to solve the murders.
Yeah.
Also, the murders aren't necessarily what you'd think either. So there's it starts out like the A plot, but it becomes sort of not when he gets to town. But that's different than what you think too, which is kind of neat.
All right.
And cool. Great shootout. Shootouts, I think, are played better in towns and taverns in particular. We all agree with that. But there's a great out in the wilderness shootout that caps off this film. That's fantastic.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up is
they all have great shootouts though. Even Only Woman Walks Ahead so far does not contain a super satisfying, awesome climactic shootout.
There you go. And maybe it should have. Maybe it should have been Jessica Chastain running up going.
Yes. No, it should not have included that.
All right, next up is Brimstone.
Oh God, talk about crazy preachers. Brimstone was supposed to star Mia Wasawaga, the Australian chick. She was awesome and in all kinds of cool stuff. Whose name just has a couple too many vowels and syllables for me to say her properly. It's not a puzzle name.
Wasikowska.
That shouldn't be so hard, but yeah, I'll say Mia. I'll say that 30 or 40 times fast. It's not funny. Old white guys like not being able to pronounce people's names anymore, but it's
Wasikowska. Mia Wasikowska.
Wasikowska. I'll give that a shot. That's a cool name. She's a good actor. Her and Robert Pattinson were supposed to star in this, but she dropped out because of some scheduling problems when it ran over, and then because she dropped out, Pattinson dropped out because he was gearing up to do Lost City of Z, which was going to take quite a bit of effort to do, and thought it wouldn't come off since she dropped out. But they got who was their original first choice. They got Dakota Fanning to do it. And then when Pattinson dropped out, he was replaced at the last second with Kit Harington, who agreed to cut his Game of Thrones vacation short and show up for it. But the real star of the thing, and the reason the film happened, even though all its stars dropped out right before shooting was about to start, which is usually not a good sign, is that Guy Pearce came up from Australia. He just decided he liked this weird character and he kind of wanted to play him. And he thought if he showed up on set, if he showed up early to make this film, that might make it actually happen. And he turned out to be very prophetic. Had he waited to see what was going to happen, the film would have been canceled, which would have been a shame because it's an interesting film, but it's, I don't want to say it's the most unpleasant film on this list because there's one super unpleasant one coming up soon, but it's tough. It's a really, really tough movie. It's shot out of, it's got all these chapters and vignettes that are shot out of time. So you experience the story not in chronological order. It's really not much of a story of a West, it's the story of the abused woman trying to escape a psycho from hell who will travel across the world to find her and abuse her because he's just that evil and obsessed, played by Guy Pearce in this case, who's this evil preacher. And because it's out of time and because it has those sort of Christopher Nolan-esque storytelling techniques, it's a bit of a movie to puzzle, and there's quite a bit of metaphor going on in it. There's quite a bit of unreliable narration happening. Is this real? Is this not real? We always say, if you sit down and watch Brimstone based on what we've said, don't, let it happen to you. Mm-hmm. Don't try and figure it out while it's happening. That will make it a frustrating experience, but give it, when you're done, give it some thought. It's a film that deserves to be examined a little bit and just studied and read about afterwards, because there's all kinds of fantastic theories. And the filmmaker in question, this Dutch filmmaker,
Martin Koolhoven,
he's great. And he, you should, in a David Lynch way and not a Ridley Scott way, he won't give you the answers. He just says, oh, that's interesting. Like he's not going to help, which is great. But I liked Brimstone for that reason. I like Dakota Fanning. She's really underrated. I mean, she's super kind of overrated kid actor, but as an adult actor, she's quite underrated because she was an overrated kid actor, which doesn't seem fair. But good in it. They were lucky to get her, even though I can see how Mia was kind of perfect for it. I mentioned that Kit came on to do Pattinson's role. Pattinson said, man, if I'd have known they were going to make that movie, I wouldn't have dropped out. I would have made it. And because his career, he shows up in some high profile things every once in a while, but his career is mostly made up of these little weird projects. He's got a whole pile of them that is his acting career. And it's only punctuated by big Hollywood movies. So he likes doing interesting stories like these. And that part's a great role for him. But it's maybe even better for Harrington, I have to say. Because Kit, he's just so blatantly heroic somehow. Like there's just something about him where
he's got an earnestness to him that is.
Yeah, and even though he plays a rather serious badass of a character in this, like you believe he's the guy that's come to save the day. And even though unfortunately that character is a badass from a whole different movie, and he doesn't really realize the movie he stumbled into, and that's he stumbled into a different kind of movie altogether, sadly for him. And it's cool. Brimstone is really wild and out there. I dug it a lot.
I can't stop looking at this poster of because Guy Pearce looks so much. It's like he's moved into Sam Neill's body. He just looks so much like Sam Neill in here. I'm sure.
And his weird Dutch accent is really weird. And he's look, you just need to experience him to get it. It's a great actor playing a part that's just loaded with great stuff to chew on and to tackle. And he does a great job.
Speaking of actors that can grow amazing mustaches and facial hair, next up is Kurt Russell in Bone Tomahawk.
Bone Tomahawk is a horror movie, first off. I call it a Western because the horrors, without ruining anything, are not supernatural. And because they only really show up in the third act, even though they're talked about throughout. So it really is a let's go rescue the townsfolk sort of Western, but it's an extremely dark one with an absolutely horrific, bloody, violent visage, carnage, entrails, the works, splattered about at the last act of the film. But before it's these kind of motley crew of people who they're women and old folk who've been kidnapped for some nefarious purpose. They're gonna eat them. That's the spoiler.
There's a snack element to it.
Yeah. So there are these people, these cave people who really have lost their minds, essentially, and are living a whole different way of life than humans have, post dawn of man. And they're going out to rescue them. One of them, Matthew Fox for the money, Kurt Russell because he's obligated to, Richard Jenkins because he's the deputy who finally gets to do some deputy work, because he's basically the deputy who just does the paperwork in the town. Richard Jenkins, such a great actor. And who else is in this? There's a handful of other folks.
We got Patrick Wilson, Matthew Fox.
Oh, yeah, Patrick Wilson's great. He's always welcome. Yeah, for sure. Yep. He's married to somebody, I believe, and that's why he has to go, because he's the real fish out of water. Who else?
We have David Arquette.
Yeah, David Arquette. Sean Young is in it.
Sean Young.
Who's the woman in it that's so good? Lily Simmons?
Lily Simmons, yes.
Good actor, yeah. So it's good. It's really good. It's one of Conan O'Brien's favorite movies of that year. It's really good. Horror fans adore it. Western fans pretty much like it because you get what you want. I just feel like if you're a Western fan, I feel like you need to warn you about it. If you're a horror fan, you don't need any warning, except that you got to wait a while for the horror to start. But if you don't like either, even though this is absolutely one of the better films on this list, it still feels hard to recommend because you really have to, it's a film you have to survive.
Yeah.
To get to the end, you know, as a viewer, you have to survive it.
Yeah, this movie was like nominated for like Fangoria Chainsaw Awards as well as like Independent Spirit Awards and things like that. So it's like it runs a nice gamut. So clearly it's got some chops going on with it, and so it's not just.
If we ever did a list of horror westerns, it would be at the very top.
There you go.
But there's no such list right now. That's like a list of 3 movies, 2 of which suck. So this one is really, really great, and it deserves to be noted for that. I mean, Russell's really, really great. You know, all these actors, you heard the list, Patrick Wilson, they all bring a lot to it, you know. And Matthew Fox is out of favor at court right now. I get it, but I mean, he plays a rather dark guy in this, and it's not difficult for him to channel that. It's very, very convincing on screen. So it's all good all the way around.
All right. If you've ever felt like one Sutherland is not enough in the next film, you get 2 Sutherlands in Forsaken.
They also had 2 Sutherlands in Max Dugan Returns and 2 Sutherlands in A Time to Kill.
But they've never had a scene together.
Well, they're on screen together in Max Dugan Returns in a baseball standpoint.
In a baseball scene, but they
don't really act a scene together. I mean, and actually, Kiefer Sutherland said that the making of Forsaken was the longest period without a break that he spent with his father in his whole life.
Wow.
He said they've been hoping the right script would come along, but, you know, something happened. Paul Newman, I think, died because Redford and Newman were always saying, well, we're waiting for the right script to come along and we'll do another movie together, like you all keep asking. But it's kind of got to be the right thing. And, you know, Newman retired. Now Redford's retired too. No more movies from those guys. And Kiefer said, well, so I decided I needed to make something happen, which wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
It's a great story about a guy who saw some horrors in the Civil War and then on his way home just couldn't find his way home. He became a gunfighter for hire. He embraced the horror, didn't know what else to do, killed a bunch of people, mostly bad guys. You know, he is a guy who has a moral compass for sure, but still has lived this sort of life of death and carnage and comes home to put that away. But he comes home to his preacher father, played by Donald Sutherland, who still is not very accepting of his kid. He's a true believer, and his kids, if he ever had any faith, which he doesn't seem to have, it doesn't have any anymore. He's trying to walk the straight and narrow. He's trying to put the violence behind him, but he doesn't know how. His childhood sweetheart's married another guy who's kind of he's not a jerk, but he's kind of a dork, we'll say.
Yeah.
And he can't reconnect with his life the way he wants to. He can he's like addicted to violence and can only take one step at a time. And it's a really powerful movie. Kiefer, ever since 24 shut down, everything Kiefer's done has been these tortured guys on walkabout who just are trying to put their awful pasts behind them. I really don't think that's a coincidence. You know, even his president character that he played on the Designated whatever, Survivor, like that guy's, you know, he's a transportation secretary who just is this nerdy dude who, when he does his press conferences as president, has to remember to take his glasses off so he doesn't seem too professorial. Like, Kiefer has that to him, that side of him that he's embraced. That, like I said, especially after his sort of pro-torture, you know, Fox show that went on for forever.
Right.
He's got that in him too. He's played a pretty, you know, Lost Boys, the aforementioned A Time to Kill. He's played some pretty nasty heavies throughout the years as well. But this was an important piece to them, and that father-son thing. I mean, that works. You have to know it, but it really, really works. It's the core of the story. There's Brian Cox plays a rancher trying to drive the villagers off their land. There's nothing. I mean, everything in this story is a cliche, sort of deliberately. What's not is the people. starting with Kiefer. But my favorite step out of the usual cliche is Michael Wincott plays the hired gun of the Brian Cox character, and he's going through something similar. This is really unique. It's unique for Michael to be playing this part, and it's unique that this guy in this role in this movie has any sort of depth to him at all, other than that he's just a mean bastard. He's sick of killing people too. He's, you know, his right-hand man, who's a total psycho, played by somebody I can't remember, who's awesome in it, and it'd be tough to you to figure out based on the cast list.
Right.
But he comes up, you know, and again, it's cliche, but it's cliche in a great way. He comes up to Kiefer when he comes into the saloon. He's like, and immediately starts intimidating him. He's like, I killed 4 people. You ever heard of me? And he's like, no, I can't say I have. He's like, well, blah, blah, blah. And he just wants to start a fight with a guy for no reason. These films are all full of this. They all have this scene in them.
Yeah.
In the Valley of Violence, it happens only because of this scene. If they just would have not talked in a tavern, none of this shit would have happened, is basically the lesson of that story. In this one, Kiefer's really, it's going to take a lot more than a lot of tough talk or even a ass kicking to get him to sort of break his vow of nonviolence. But it's great. He kind of talks this guy down, and he goes back to his crew to play poker, and Wincott comes up to him and he goes, hey, my name's Dave, whatever. You might
Gentleman
know me as,
Dave. Yeah, Gentleman
you might
Dave.
know me as Gentleman Dave. And he goes, yeah, you I've heard of, is what he says to him. And these two guys have this bond. Dave says to him, he's like, you know, I saw you. I have to say, it was my pleasure to see you gun down this evil guy that, you know, he goes, that was something to see. I got to say it. He's like, oh, okay, thanks. You know, so we're not going to have any problems here. And Kiefer's great line. He says it as he's walking out the door. He goes, not from me, he says. But of course he gets drawn into the thing. You can't not, you know where it's going to go. But Gentleman Dave, man, I just got to say that guy, and their relationship, it's outstanding. And I love the film for that reason. Demi Moore too. Shout out to her, taking a little part. Her and Kiefer are lifelong friends. They were in, I don't know which ones, but they've been in movies together. It's hard for me to remember, but
they were all part of that Brat Pack.
Exactly. So she shows up and brings a lot of, again, weight and history in a very small role that with a different actor might have been great, but with her, she elevates it. And Kiefer understands that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they sort of mapped out this story together, but he was wise enough not to do it himself. He got a director and writer to do it. I love Forsaken. Forsaken's the movie that I saw that made me think of doing this list. So it's like the quintessential, maybe not, it's not the best film on this list, but it's the sort of exact kind of perfect example of this type of film. Yeah. If you're a fan of any of the above, I recommend it. It's also a relatively crowd pleasing Western. Sure. And it has the biggest handgun I've ever seen in a Western, which apparently was a real thing, which was really, really powerful. But because it was so high maintenance, gunfighters typically didn't use it because you needed to reload fast. You needed to draw fast. You were not going to draw this thing fast. You know, you were at a major disadvantage if you tried. So, but it's fun. It's a movie that has all this meaning, deep meaning in it, interpersonal meaning. And yet it's still the big gun comes out at the end. You know what I mean?
Right.
Hard to explain.
Okay. These last,
and I love Michael Wincott, you know.
Yeah.
He's always, you know, he always shows you the human side of the bad guys he plays. He's really good at that. He always, you think of Guy Gisborne in the Prince of Thieves, for example, like that guy is a bit of a dumbass. And what Wincott brings to that role is that he sort of knows that he is. Like, this is a guy who's the bad guy because he's related to the real bad guy. And he's kind of doing his best to be a bad guy, but he's not. Right. He's not particularly great at it, and he doesn't really relish it. That all comes through in the film somehow. It's not on the page. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of actor he is. And this role, I mean, man, he's good in it. I just loved it. I love Gentleman Dave. And you're just like, God, they're going to have to shoot it out with each other. It just sucks.
Yeah.
So check it out. Forsaken.
Right. So these last few films here, we go back in time a little bit from, you know, because Forsaken was 2015.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go back 7 years to 2008.
Wow.
And I
Didn't they make any
feel,
Westerns in between then?
oh, well, no, I'm sure.
Well, these are the indie Westerns that I think started the indie Western.
Yeah.
And because they're technically part of the streaming era, they kind of got on this list.
Yep.
But I think these sort of kicked it off, and we'll do these a little faster.
Yeah, so Appaloosa, which I feel is a movie we've talked about before, but I'm not sure.
Perhaps. Ed Harris and Viggo Mortensen's a relatively big budget Western. Ed Harris, it was his second directorial project after Pollock. And of course they had just done what's the Cronenberg film that also has violence in the title?
Yes, it's one of Viggo Mortensen's best known films. It is.
Yeah, they did, and Ed Harris is in it as sort of the bad guy. Yeah. So they knew each other from that.
History of Violence.
Really, really good film. They just play a couple of guys who come to town because Jeremy Irons is again an evil rancher who the town has completely lost control of, and they hire this guy Virgil Cole and his trusty sidekick to keep the peace, and he does. He quickly whips them down into shape. Ed Harris plays the old Western guy, who gets the job done, is sort of a badass. And Viggo is a really fun sidekick to him and is also like a really steady hand with a big shotgun at his side.
Yeah.
And the two of them basically do what they came to do. Where things get screwed up is this woman, this church organist, comes to town and gets a job as a piano player in a saloon, played by Renee Zellweger. And this is my favorite Renee Zellweger role. It's probably weird to say that because she's won Oscars and stuff. And because this woman, if you come to this with a sort of Ryan Murphy / Shonda Rhimes sense of easy justice, if you really like CSI episodes, or if you really think there's 8 million serial killers like in that serial killer show, and that we catch one every week in a satisfying way, then this is not the movie for you, because the conventional heroic Western, which it has in spades in the first hour, completely comes off the rail when the woman gets involved. And the woman is Adriana Gill from Pan's Labyrinth, plays like the town whore that Viggo Mortensen has a recurring business transactions with, and they seem to have actually a little more than a connection than that. And he doesn't understand Zellweger's character, and he asks her about it, and she goes, you know what, she probably doesn't understand it. She's just drawn to whoever the alpha male is in the room and can't help herself.
Yeah.
And probably doesn't even know why. Sometimes we don't know what we do. She sort of explains it to him so that he can at least act on it. But you go online and read it, and you read all these butch Western fans going, I thought this Western was awesome until Ed Harris became a big pussy. It's like, they just fundamentally didn't dig the story, or even the idea that, this Eastwood-like badass could lose his dignity when he fell in love with somebody. But that happens to us, man. It happens to all of us. Maybe not all of us, maybe not the guys writing those reviews, but
well, they've never been in
that you've lost yourself, and you're just part of really falling in love is that connection. It's how you sort of surrender some of your superpowers over to the other people. And that's why that trust there, that's so important. But there's no trust earned in this relationship whatsoever. And yet he can't help himself. He's in love with her and wants to make it work. And because of that, as a lawman who has to be ruthless, he becomes extremely compromised. And it's about how that works out. It's about love and friendship and loyalty and what those things mean. And I really, really like it. And again, Renee, this part, people really do hate her in it. I've read, like, not just online critics, but real critics say that's just it's character assassination or whatever, but it isn't. It isn't. Try and see that person for what she is, and try and understand why she might be the way she is, and and especially in the world that she lives in. And there's this great scene where they rescue her from a bunch of Apaches or something. They're sitting around the fire, and Ed's sort of disgusted with her or whatever, and she to get back in his good graces, she makes up this story about how Viggo's character started hitting on her and grabbing at her and stuff. So the exact opposite actually happened.
Yeah.
And they wait. Two of them, total cowboys. They just patiently wait for this long, stupid, obviously untrue story to end. And then and Viggo says, that did not happen. He goes, no, I did not do that. And what's Viggo's name in it?
It is sorry to move on.
It makes
Everett Hitch.
Yeah, I did. He goes, I did not do that. And then Ed Harris says, no, Everett didn't do that. And she goes, you're going to take his word over mine? And he goes, yeah, that's about the size of it. But he doesn't fall out of love with her. That's the thing. And it's problematic. It's great. Irons is great in it. The town council is played by like Timothy Spall and this whole rogues gallery of great Western / British character actors. Mm-hmm. Is it Lance Henriksen and Adam Nelson that show up? Two James Cameron alums. They're great together as these brothers who are kind of the only guys that are on Ed and Viggo's level, and so are quite a threat to them. It's a good movie. Appaloosa I really, really liked, but you do have to understand that it's a bait and switch. It really does switch. The meaning of the story and the meaning of everything changes, and you got to kind of cope with that. But I loved it.
Very cool. All right, next up is we're going to go back down under to see The Proposition.
Yeah, directed by John Hillcoat and written by Nick Cave, of all people.
Yep.
This is a story about a group of brothers in the outback who are
the Charlie Burns gang.
Yeah, where the younger brother does something dumb and gets caught, and they use that to blackmail the middle brother, played by Guy Pearce, to go kill his older brother, or his baby brother is going to be killed. That's the proposition. Mm-hmm. Complicated. Danny Houston plays the older brother, I believe.
Yes, that is correct.
And it also has this. There's the settling of the outback, and the outback as a stand-in for the Old West. There's this sort of side story with what's his face, Faramir. I can't remember his name. Australian actor.
Is that Ray Winstone?
No,
that's not Ray Winstone. He's the older guy.
Yeah. The older, more rotund fellow. John Hurt is also in it, so it's got a great cast. He should be there somewhere near the top. He's a pretty big star. He was in 300. He was in Van Helsing. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So we have Guy Pearce, Danny Houston, David Wenham.
David Wenham.
Yeah, David Wenham.
I just needed you to start me off.
Yes.
David Wenham's an actor that I really, really like. So he plays he's very much like the Jack Davenport. They hired the good-looking, heroic guy to play this sort of compromised, problematic fellow, given what his surroundings are and his ambitions are. Mm-hmm. Proposition's a good film. It's good. It's a dark movie. It really is just kind of what we said. There's more to it than that. There is no conventional heroics in it, and there's no real satisfying shootouts. The film doesn't want you to feel satisfied by its story, and it goes out of its way not to. That's what's brave about it. These days, there's a handful of these, a bunch of them on this list that we talked about that take a similar path. But this was the first film I'd seen in some time with these sorts of trappings that just showed you the gross, harsh, brutal reality of it in a way that didn't pay off dramatically in even like an Unforgiven sort of way. Because even that film, the guy still gets liquored up. He still goes in there and gets revenge for his friend. And you still feel sort of a relief and happiness at that, no matter how horrific it is. This film just there's no way that this kind of story can turn out well. And of course it doesn't. but there's a lot of surprises, interpersonal surprises along the way as well.
Sure.
It's Guy Pearce's favorite film he's ever made.
Interesting.
So,
one thing that you should never do is never turn your back on the past. And that leads us to Seraphim Falls.
And this might be the most satisfying of this group on a different level. This film is metaphysical almost. It's hard. This is such a straightforward story. Pierce Brosnan plays a Northern soldier who, during the Civil War, was present for an atrocity where Liam Neeson's character, a Southerner, loses everything. And Liam Neeson's character is chasing Brosnan's character. He'll chase him anywhere. He'd chase him around the world and back. He'll chase him to the moon. He's chasing him and he's hunting him and he will kill him. And that's the simple, straightforward drive of the thing. And yet there's not Brosnan's not a bad guy per se. So there's no conventional bad guy. There's just this awfulness and this sort of revenge mission that sprung out of it. Liam Neeson's gang includes Ed Lauder and who else? A bunch of really good actors. Ed Lauder is one of my favorites, and he's great in it. Is Wincott in this too? Yes, he is. Yeah, he's one of them. So in the more conventional Wincott's a psycho who has to be reckoned with sort of role. Angelica Houston plays a character in it who may or may not be the actual devil. So it's great. It's got lots of action. It's got lots of non-shootout survival wilderness action, which is fantastic. It's gorgeously shot, I believe, in almost entirely in New Mexico. And it takes full advantage of the extremes of the New Mexico landscape, the snow and the woods and the rolling rivers and then the practically barren desert.
Oh, John Toll shot this film.
Yeah. And I believe it. John Toll waiting around to do a Western. It's a stunningly shot film, as you can imagine, with him at behind the lens. And just the two sort of middle-aged guys in this battle, like that, it's just something really amazing about that. And like I said, there's something more to it. There's something metaphysical about it. They're fighting kind of for more than just what their issues are between each other. There's this sort of soul of America thing. There's very much an angel and demon sort of aspect to it. I don't want to sell it as like a supernatural movie. It isn't that at all, but every time you think they might come to some sort of reckoning that doesn't involve one killing the other, some sort of thing intervenes and keeps the fight going, and it's a really powerful, really beautiful, very exciting movie, Seraphim Falls. So if you love Westerns, particularly if you love the like I say, not so much the Stranger Comes to Town Westerns, but those survival in the wilderness films, it's a really, really good one. Well, with a couple of top-notch stars who are really into it. Yeah. Neeson and Brosnan are in. They're in kind of a B-movie Western, but they're just bringing it all. It's awesome. Because you know what? Because they probably have been waiting for a chance to do a Western, and they're loving it. They're loving getting to play, cowboys. Yeah, and the two guys, I think it's two brothers or two people that directed it. I can't remember who. Yes, it is. It's a team direction, and it's one of their first films, so they're also living. It's David Von Anken is credited, but it's like written by let's see, David Von Anken. You don't know any of these people, so it's not important. Yeah. Anyway, but in a lot of ways, I don't know that this is the best movie on this list either, but it's the oldest, and it's a good one to try, which is why I saved it for last, because I find it hard to believe that people could not be into this one. It's really, really strong storytelling, strong visual storytelling, very little talking. Right. Because these guys are in scenes together, you could say, but they don't have much interaction with each other than the ones running away from the other one or vice versa. It's, it's pretty cool film. I dig it.
Well, very cool. All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap it up for our Indie Western Roundup.
And don't say we held anything back, because Natalie Portman and Ewan McGregor did a Western together after their Star Wars movies called Jane Got a Gun. Robert Pattinson and Mia Sikowska. Close. That's not right either, but I'm getting closer.
Vashikowski.
They actually did end up doing a Western together called Damsel, which is great. So there's a whole bunch of these. Michael Fassbender did a Western called something West. With West in the title. So I left a bunch off because they're not quite as good, even though they're interesting too in their own way.
The Fassbender one was called West.
It was called Slow West. Thank you for that pause and the excitement where I could actually remember the name of the film. My point is, there's a whole bunch of these. There's another evil preacher where Ed Harris plays the evil preacher called Sweetwater.
Oh yeah. I know.
And that's a feminist Western. That's one where the woman of the town's the only one with any balls to go up against the guy, So that there's a lot of these types of films. I do think they say something about us. I do think they're interesting. I do think they're exciting. There's a lot to like about them. So that's why I'm bringing them up again, and probably for the last time, since we're going to call this the definitive take on modern Westerns of the aughts and teens.
Well, it is a roundup. All right. So let's move on. We got time for just a couple, but let's get some hot takes.
Let's get some hot takes. Let's get some hot takes. Let's get some hot takes. Let's get some hot takes.
All right. So the first hot take it's one of my favorite. I don't know why I like this Twitter handle as much as I do, but it's Angela Merkin. Angela Merkin says, your opinion on movies is worthless unless you have seen at least 10 feature-length silent films. That's the hot take.
Sure.
I'm
sitting here going 6, 7. Yeah, trying to get to 10.
I think I think just taking that film class that we took in college with Ted Morris means that we've seen
enough to say that we qualify for that. And if I qualify for it, then I'm happy to disqualify everybody else.
Boom!
Every time. So I agree with that hot take, Angela. Totally.
Angela Merkin also says people who call them films are classist.
I admit I don't call them films a lot. I find myself doing it when I'm hyping the show or writing the copy for the show, because I just try and mix up the things we call them, movies, stories, films, just to have more than one word to use. I don't like repeating the same words over and over again. But it's not called the film show with Joel and Ryan. It's called the movie show. So I don't agree with that, but I get what you're saying. If you repeat the term film enough times when you're talking about films, you do sound like a bit of a douche. So we attempt not to do that on the show.
Oh, Angela.
Yeah.
Thank you, Angela Merkin.
Thanks, Angela.
All right. Another, this person, Jeff Johnston, he writes, Goodfellas is awful. Just a corny as hell bad movie that starts by fetishizing gangsters literally and then spends the rest of its running time performatively pretending to feel bad for doing so.
Jeff, you've put me in the awkward position of having to defend Goodfellas, which I don't really like, I have to say. That said, despite not liking and enjoying and finding what you say about Goodfellas to have a lot of truth to it, you can't just dismiss it as garbage. That's incorrect. It's an extremely accomplished film with all kinds of kind of amazing cinema moments in it. And as time goes by, I only appreciate those things more. At the same time, yes, even at the time, it was my least favorite of the 4 or 5 awesome gangster movies of 1990. It partly is because it reveals a truly unpleasant, seedy difficult side of the lifestyle in a way that the other films avoid that. There's certainly consequences for being a gangster in Godfather 3. Definitely everything goes to pot in State of Grace. We talked about that before. Miller's Crossing is little more than a gangster fantasy. As perfect as it is, it's a bit of a gangster fantasy. It doesn't hold itself to any sort of truth-telling standard the way Goodfellas does. And Goodfellas deserves the credit for doing that, to make you queasy, to have the ending feel like you're high on cocaine and exhausted and just want the world to end. Like it puts you through those paces. It does glorify gangster life in a time when it was glorified, and it shows what it's like to live long enough at a time when it is not. And that's unpleasant. From a movie standpoint, you don't like watching the romanticized world early in that film disappear before your eyes. It's sad and frustrating, but it's not a terrible movie. It's quotable. It's enjoyable. We talked about it in multiple episodes because it's a significant film.
Yeah.
The extended takes are kind of amazing and magical in their way. Some of the dialogue is quotable and just still to this day stunning. It has a fantastically undercooked Robert De Niro performance alongside an impossibly over-ripened Joe Pesci performance. Ray Liotta's never very likable leading man, but that's what's great about him, because when you need a leading man that's not terribly likable, he's going to play that. He's going to give you the truth of that, and he gets to that in the film. So, I like Goodfellas. I don't love it. I don't rate it super highly, and I don't enjoy it as much as, other conventional film fans do. And I catch a lot of heat because of that. But yeah, I don't hate it, and I still argue it's probably better than Dances with Wolves.
Yeah, that's a good call. Well,
I don't know. I mean, we don't talk about these other movies when we talk. The debate is always Goodfellas and Dances with Wolves, and if those are the two I had to vote for as an Oscar member, maybe in 1990 when I was 17, I would have voted for Dances with Wolves. But as I've matured, that movie seems like a sort of overlong little simplistic morality tale in a way that Goodfellas is far more complex and surprising and interesting. So,
very cool.
That's a long answer to that statement, but
that's
normally usually you put me and 4 other film fans in a room and you will get I'll be the one that hates Goodfellas. So I'm not used to being the one having to defend it. You put me in a weird spot. Good for you. That's a good question. Hot take.
All right. Now, in order to do this next hot take, I got to ask, did you see Kong versus Godzilla?
No.
Okay. Then I can't, I'll skip it and wait for that.
Ask it and see.
Well, because it deals with the ending, though, and I don't want to spoil. Here's what. Okay, so William Bibiani, who's a reviewer, I think for IGN, I want to say, but anyway, he's a reviewer. This is a hot take he had. People who hate movies for being political are. I'm paraphrasing. This is not an exact quote, but I'm paraphrasing a much longer thread that he had on Twitter at one point. People who hate movies for being political are actually just nostalgic for the time before they were political. Movies have always been political.
They have always been.
Yeah.
So, yes and no. This is we try and remain as unpolitical as we can on the show.
Right.
Obviously, we both have our political passions and points of view. I don't know how to say that. Like, people are nostalgic for when movies weren't political or when they didn't see the politics in movies or whatever. Like, I do get that. I even can maybe feel that way sometimes. I mean, what I don't like, and not to switch to a different topic, but our buddy Brett Favre did a phone interview with one of the big sports things, and he said, this is how he came at the subject, which I really hated, and I basically hate the point he's making, and I'll explain why. But he said, people keep telling me, the fans keep telling me, all this, people are telling me something I think, and now I'm going to tell it to you under this context. But people keep saying they don't like football anymore because it's too political. First of all, let's just skip first, second, third of all. Skip right to the gut of this thing. Fourth of all, the only reason the people are telling you that it's too political is because Black people are being political now. Yeah. Because every time you march out the flag, sing the national anthem, thank the troops, ad nauseum, the things that we've been doing for decades, it's been political. Only time the people thought it got too political was when somebody had the nerve to kneel for the national anthem. And what I thought, we won't get into the deets of that, but which I thought, and which a lot of us think, was a pretty respectful form of protest, a form of protest that he was told to do by one of those soldiers that we all support, one of those troops. That's what they do or often will do at, the funerals of fallen comrades. The guy in question who was kneeling for the national anthem started out by protesting America as it was at the time by sitting on the bench. That was a bad look. And he was asked why he was doing that. And he said, well, because these are the things that are happening in the world. And I just, it's hard for me to get geared up or whatever to celebrate all that when we're so wounded as a nation. And once this soldier heard that, he pulled him aside and said, hey, if you really want to do this thing right, this is what we do. You should do this. None of that context matters anymore. But that's what's important is that's the too political that people are talking about.
Right.
It's not my politics. So it's too political. And that's without reading into what his argument, what he's saying, but it's very similar thing. First of all, what's too political? Well, I haven't seen what was Kong versus Godzilla political? Was Wonder Woman 1984 political? Well, I mean, what are you even talking about? All these The Last Skywalker too political for you? I mean, what are you talking about? The films that are out there aren't political at all. Revenge of the Sith was more political than The Force Awakens was.
Here's what I would say. I will say, going back, people will say that The Last Skywalker, and in fact the whole third trilogy, was too political in the fact that they made a woman the main character, and the like one of the main secondary characters was a Black man. And even like our rogue hero,
because it was diverse, it was politically correct, and therefore can be dismissed.
And therefore was political, and therefore was like, why are you doing this? Why can't it just be, a bunch of
I don't want to dismiss a full 36.5% of the nation, but honestly, if you feel that way, if you can't take an Asian woman having a major role in a Hollywood movie, what possible opinion could you have about anything else in the world that anybody would want to listen to? That's just absurd. I hate to draw a line and be political, but it sounds like you're just miffed that the art reflects the world to a certain degree.
Right.
And I'll tell you, it still doesn't, but at least any noble attempt to try and make it reflect the world a little bit better.
Right.
No, I think that's frustrating. I think it's a bummer that, that it's been decided now that like a sort of straight woman can't play a male transvestite in a movie. I think that's too bad. That's one less movie about a male transvestite that you're going to get as a result of your orthodoxy in that way. But those are all things we can talk about and work around. Mm-hmm. But I just don't want a woman who has talent or a character that has like special abilities to be in a film that I watch. Like, just, you got to get over yourself, man. Just
right.
Look around the world. Do you know any talented, awesome women whose stories are cool? That's how things are.
Yeah.
But just get used to it, because it's not that's not changing. That's not even political to me. I get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
If that's what you think is political, then you're beyond help.
I would agree with that.
But if what you really think is political is it's not, like, I disagree with it. It's not my politics. Or suddenly some other uncomfortable politics is latched on to something that was always political in a way that I was comfortable with. I mean, okay, I get that. There's lots of politics I'm not comfortable with that I've been confronted for a number of years with as well. And I get riled up about that and speak out about that. But it's like Joel said, it's always been political. And you can't wax nostalgic for a time where the racial politics or the sexual politics were simpler. There, in no way were those times better from a racial politics or sexual politics standpoint. Indeed, our active sort of cell phone lives, have revealed the reality has always been there.
Yeah.
While our movies were taking it easy on certain things during a certain era, we've seen that hatred, that resentment that's always been there, and it's worse than ever. It's worse than ever. So how do you not make movies about that? How do you not tell the stories of that? I don't see how. How do you not make the big blockbuster your stories, at least to some tiny degree, reflect some of those ideas without them being giant empty vessels? And if all you want is a giant empty stupid movie, then hey, I don't feel bad for you, because congrats, you got tons of those going on too. So there you go. That's me being political. I don't know.
I love it. Well, that's not necessarily the direction but I love it because it's true. And if we're going to get knocked for being too political, I stand by what we are saying there. All right. So next week, let me get this going here. Next week, there we go. Next week, we are kicking off a couple weeks of discussion on one of our favorite miniseries movie entities. It's our franchise, the V miniseries.
V, the original miniseries, and V, the final battle. Double deep dives.
Yep.
Coming in a week.
Yep, we will be tackling these with, of course, a good friend of the show and frequent guest, Michael.
And V fanatic.
Yes, and very much a V fanatic.
It would be good to have on board.
Yep. So we will be discussing that. And so we hope that you will join us next week and the week after that. Other than that, you can reach out to us, of course, at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan Facebook page, at Ask Joel and Ryan on Twitter and Instagram, and on YouTube at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan YouTube page, which if you are watching this, you're there. Hit subscribe, like it.
You're already there.
You're already there.
The button is like right there. It's right there.
Mash on it.
Or it's probably kind of over there.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.